Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews and to another episode of Overbooked, the series where I talk about every single book on my shelves because how else are we meant to submit to our vampiric overlords? Today we are finishing off our trilogy of Josie Jaffrey videos with her third trilogy, the Sovereign series. Some quick disclaimers before we start. I've mentioned in a couple of other videos, Josie is somebody I know personally, so be aware of that bias in this review. I'll try and keep it as unbiased as I can, but you know how it is. I'm going to keep this as spoiler-free as humanly possible. If you do want to go into this series knowing absolutely nothing, don't watch review videos. And I will pop a link to Josie's website in the description, which I think has content warnings for these. I can't remember if it has them for this series. I'm going to guess that it does. So this was actually the first Josie Jaffrey series that I read, which may have been an error for reasons I will explain later. But hey, we've all got to start somewhere in life. This is a post-apocalyptic vampire series that in chronological order comes after the Solus Invicti series by quite a long way. We're quite a long time away from the events of those books. Josie is an excellent human being. I've talked about her in a couple of videos previously, so if you want to check those out you can, or as I say, I will link her website if you want to find out more. She writes heaps of stuff. There's a lot of short stories and things. If you want to find an author whose universe you can just dive into, Josie is a good way to go. I will read you the blurb of book 1, The Gilded King, but the other books are The Silver Queen, book 2, I think. I'm pretty sure it's book 2. It's hard to tell, the covers are very similar. Yes, Sovereign, book 2. And The Blood Prince is book 3. I'll pop those behind me. Vaguely visible, it'll do. In the blue, the world's last city, all is not well. Julia is stuck within its walls. She serves an ability from a distance until she meets Lucas, a boy who believes in fairy tales that Julia's world can't accommodate. The blue is her prison, not her castle, and she'd escape into the trees if she didn't know that contamination and death awaited humanity outside. But not everyone in the blue is human, and not everyone can be contained. Beyond the city's boundaries, in the wild forests of the red, Cameron has precious little humanity left to lose. As he searches for a lost queen, he finds an enemy rising that he thought long dead, an enemy that the humans have forgotten how to fight. One way or another, the walls of the blue are coming down. The only question is what side you'll be on when they do. Dun, dun, dun. This series is post-apocalyptic, but it's vampires, which is a very exciting, chain of events. I don't know how many other books like that exist. For me, this is the only one of its kind that I have read. I think when I talked about Solus Invicti, I talked about how interesting it is to be like at the start of a kind of either apocalypse or a big change in the entire world, and it's nice to kind of see the long-term impact of that. I've managed to do a few videos where the dog hasn't interrupted, and I don't think it's going to happen today. If you want a cool, individual, unique vampire setting, I think this is a really good one to go for. I will say it doesn't feel apocalyptic in the sense of kind of zombie apocalypse stuff, although that's vaguely what we're dealing with here. It feels very uniquely apocalyptic, which also is probably a selling point unless you're looking for that very specific vibe. I think that's partly because book 1, so much of it takes place in this city where everything's sort of pretending to be wonderful and good. You learn very early on that that's not the case. So there are some unlikely romances in this, by which I mean characters who perhaps maybe you wouldn't have thought might get together do, and it's exciting. And I think if you read a lot of vampire fiction, it won't be totally unexpected for you. I mean unlikely in the sense of in this setting, they would be unlikely. But I really like the way Josie writes romance. I still maintain, I think if she rewrote this series now, it would be a lot saucier than it perhaps is now. Maybe, I don't know, Josie, weigh in. But the romances are lovely, and it's a kind of continuation of some of the romances from the previous series, which is also fun. Which leads me to my next point, which is that if you really liked the previous books, I think there was a lot of, I've said fan service, but I think just like a continuation of that plot going on in this series, which does make it a little bit difficult to read this series on its own, which is definitely what I did the first time, and I regret it. It makes virtually no sense. I think the first 2 books you could get by, maybe 1.5, you can get by without having read the other series, Solus Invicti specifically. However, book 3 will make no sense if you haven't read those books. You absolutely need to read the previous books first. This isn't a series you can just pick up on its own. I wouldn't recommend it anyway. For me personally, I don't know if it was because I hadn't read the other series first, and that's just an impression that stayed with me, or if these just don't feel as strong. I personally like Josie's other series much more. My hierarchy of things go, Seekers is top tier, Solus Invicti, I've already said it a bunch of times, is middle, and this is probably my least favourite of the 3. It's still good, it's still worth reading, but you do need to read at least Solus Invicti to just inform the events of this book. I think Julia is a really lovely main character. Julia and Cam are kind of our main anchor points for this series, and I like Julia a lot. I find that her reaction to the situation that she's in at the start of book 1 is really interesting, in terms of, for me personally, if I was in that situation, I'm the kind of person who would just roll over and be like, I give up, just let me go, I'll happily die, goodbye, thank you so much. Whereas Julia has a lot more fight to her. And obviously that's because otherwise it would be a very short series. But I just enjoyed her greatly, and Cam has some really interesting character moments. I think his romance is one of my favourite parts of the series as a whole. I liked his introspection, I guess, and if you've read all of the book, Cam is one of the characters who features throughout, and I found him just particularly fun to read. I still really enjoy Josie's vampires as well. I think the silver as a concept are cool, and that stands across all three sets of books. In this, the limitations put on the silver and some of the constraints put upon them, where in previous books we've seen them be basically all-powerful, particularly in the Seekers series, is really interesting, and I like that as a touch point of again, I mentioned it in other videos, but getting to see how this society of functionally immortals changes throughout time, I think that's really interesting. I couldn't think of a single comparison for this series, and I don't know if that's because I don't have a huge amount of memory for it. Like, I reread this in the last 3 weeks, and I don't have a huge amount of memory for it. But I do like where it stands as part of a bigger series, so I think in terms of if you're looking for sets of series that all slot together, let's talk about that instead. Old Kingdom by Garth Nix, I think that has a lot of different books that all combine in different ways throughout time. I think that's really interesting. Tamara Pierce is another one that I think would be exciting. That's got a set of, I think it's a bunch of quartets. I think they're usually 4 books, 3 or 4 books that all combine. I want to do another read along for those because I want to reread all of them and have the wonderful time. I haven't worked out when I'm going to do it yet. Any others that I can think of? I guess maybe Robin Hobb, very different from these books, but again in that sense of a bunch of different series that all intersect. So those are they're not really comparisons, but they're more other things you might want to pick up, I guess, if you really like delving into a universe. Should you read this? I think if you read the other books, these are enjoyable and they are a good addition to that series. Do not read them without reading the other books. That's just my 2 cents. And I think that's probably come across in this review. I don't think this is going to be particularly long because I don't have a lot to say about these books because I don't find they've stuck with me as much, which is sad, and maybe with another reread they would. Thank you so much for watching. I'm sorry if this is weird in the edit. I'm having to edit around a lot of dog stuff at the moment. She's just having a fidgety morning. I'm excited to film 2 more videos today with this energy. It's fine. Have you read these? Do you have plans to? Do you have a favourite indie author or indie series that you would really like to share? Please plonk it down in the comments below while you're down there commenting. If you haven't already, please do subscribe. It makes me feel loved and appreciated. Follow me on social media. Come hang out on Discord where we have a wonderful time talking about books. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next one. It's gonna be some bloopers now. Didn't get my notes up. Gonna do it now. Some quick spoilers. I'm so sorry. She's just like being really daft. That was you kicking the wall. No, bed does not mean come here. Bed.